Soften your mouth. Make sure that you're not biting your tongue or clenching your teeth. Stay in this place of softness where everything just flows. Another inhale here. And as you exhale, place your palm on your belly button. Nice and gentle. And take the opposite palm and place it right on the center of your chest, your heart space. Another deep inhale in through your nose, and this time as you exhale, allow your eyes to close. And as you continue breathing in this manner, take a moment and allow yourself to just settle and sink into this space, this oasis that you have created for yourself of comfort, of safety, this oasis of trust. As you breathe, notice your breath. Notice the flow and the temperature of the air as it enters in through your nostrils and exhales out through your nostrils. Observe the steadiness and the continuation of this breath. Notice the warmth of your palm against your belly button. Feel the rhythm of your heartbeat. Just as your breath has a rhythm and a formula, so does how we heal. As we continue to breathe today, our formula will be to release and to forgive in order to heal. Deep breath in. And as you exhale, allow your palms to come down to your lap, down to your sides. Just release your palms wherever is most comfortable in this moment. And continue to breathe as we prepare ourselves for a personal and intimate journey. The ultimate goal of this journey is to deepen our breath and to elevate our growth. Breathe in and exhale. Breathe and imagine all the colors, the flavors, the sounds, the textures that make you, you. Consider the version of yourself that appears in your mind's eye when you think about your job, your place of employment. Deep breath in and exhale. Notice what version of you appears when you think about your social circles, the sisterhoods or the brotherhoods, the congregations that you belong to. Deep inhale and exhale. Check in with your heart and notice what version of you shows up in your intimate partnerships. When you anoint yourself with the title of wife, husband, girlfriend, lover. As you breathe, notice the weight of these different versions of you. If you're feeling lighter or heavier, but because this is a safe and a trusting space, there is no judgment. Just allow the breath to flow. As finally, you imagine within the relationship with yourself, what version of you shows up? How does that person speak to you? How does that person speak about you? Hold that vision in your heart. Feel the emotions surrounding that vision. And just let it breathe. Let it breathe. Let it breathe. Now, I want you to envision that person that you believe to be, in your mind, the perfect human, the most beautiful woman, the perfect figure, the most loving parent, the picture perfect spouse, the smartest businesswoman, the hustler with the dopest product, the most wealthiest entrepreneur. See that person clearly in your mind's eye. Again, no judgment, no comparison, no right or wrong. Feel what it feels like to be that person. Merge the versions of you onto the versions of that person, that woman, that figure. that parent, that spouse, that hustler, that entrepreneur, that perfect, idealized person. And feel what it feels to be that. You don't know their journey. You don't know their struggles. You don't know what happened in their life for them to be able to manifest this version of their appearance, this version of their personhood. Because just like you, depending on the scenario, the situation, the environment, different versions will show up. Right now, today, I want you to remember that you have the power to decide how you want to show up. Your past does not define you. The decisions that you made when you had the mindset of a child does not dictate or indicate the type of adult that you will be, that you are. Hold on to that vision of that perfect, idealized person in your mind, in your heart, and let it breathe. You own that vision. You are that vision. You have the ability to birth this version of you over and over and over again. Because this, honestly, is the most important birth that you will ever endure. This version of you. Because if we wait for other people, for things to change, if we just continuously wait for better things or what we believe to be better things to come in order for us to realize our happiness, we'll always be waiting. We have to live life moment by moment. You must create the life that will give you the bliss and the fulfillment that your heart desires. Let it breathe. Let it breathe. Releasing and forgiving in order to obtain your healing. As you heal, remember that only you undermine and underestimate your own innate power to create the most powerful, most divine feeling of magnetism in the universe. This feeling of attraction, this feeling of gratefulness, this feeling of love. As long as you hold on to this version of yourself, where you are grateful, where you are full of love, as long as you maintain this version of gratitude, every single day of your life. Make this be your focus. Let it breathe. Let it breathe. And as things change and we move about in the world presenting this new, whole version of ourselves, when the time comes that we must focus on someone or something outside of ourselves, know that you are blessing them with this gift of your time, this gift of your generosity, this gift of your lightness, this gift of your own forgiveness, this gift and this honor of your love. We are all reflections. We are all reflections. And in this reflection, in this state of oneness, this is where you thrive. This is where you create love and harmony within all the versions of you, within all your relationships. But most importantly, this is where the love and the harmony is built with your relationship with your divine source, your divine power. This right here, this feeling, this mindset is where you develop the love and the harmony with yourself. Breathe in through your nose and out through your nose. In through your nose and out through your nose. Breathe. Gently, slowly begin to blink your eyes open. And reacclimate yourself to your surroundings, to this space, to this moment. Again, my name is Ayesha, Wildflower Wellness. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Ayesha. Thank you for pouring yourself into that. I hope that it blesses everyone on the line to just take a moment. Sometimes as women, we don't take a moment to even just breathe. So taking moments to breathe, to connect with God, to pray, I think is so much a part of healing. And I know for me, I've also, like, for the past couple years, I've been on a journey of just healing all areas of my life. And for those of us that suffer with infertility or have had loss, or just different reproductive health ailments, we can hold that. We can hold that in our womb, and we have to allow ourselves to heal from the inside out. So I truly, truly appreciate that. I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, which is Kim Upshaw. I'm going to go ahead and read your bio, Kim, and then if I leave anything out or you want to add anything, I'll allow you to do that. All right, so Kim Paris Upshaw is a dynamic author, speaker, singer, and songwriter whose love of Christ shines through in her words, lyrics, and voice. Kim is the author of Sunshine and Daniel, Seeking Grace in Lost Motherhood, a memoir Bible study that addresses the age-old issue of child loss and motherhood. Weakened with the grief and shame of past choices, Kim desperately searched for answers and help after the loss of her children. During her quest for relief, she discovered great purpose from her pain. Passionately, Kim now shares how God's favor strengthens lives. After all, it restored hers. Using fresh perspectives on biblical characters and stories, Kim inspires readers to live life more abundantly. Although she's a lawyer from 9 to 5, Kim makes up for it as a gospel recording artist and songwriter the rest of the day. Through her words, lyrics, and voice, Kim motivates readers and listens to courageously love better and live better. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning. I want to thank you, Deanna, for such a wonderful opportunity and such a wonderful time to come together and talk about this. I think the meditation this morning kind of just did my whole session, but I want to just touch on some of what she said as well as talk about grace. And I'm going to start at the end. I'm going to start at my conclusion. And some people read books and go right to the end. So I'm just going to take you to the end first and we'll go back. But when I think about grace, I believe that grace is a woman. And I'll tell you why I think that and why in my life that touch of grace has been so important as I've gone through this journey of child loss. I have not been able to have my own biological children. And I'll take you through that story. And I was sharing with Deanna how for many years, I never saw this as, I never realized that I had infertility. It's not a term, I'm probably a little bit older than many of us on the line today, but it's not a term that we used a lot. And not in African-American community did we talk about infertility. You were just one of those women who just didn't have children. I had a neighbor one time share her opinion of me as I was going through my career and not having children. And she mentioned that I was trying to be like that person on TV. And was I going to have a test tube baby? And that was very insensitive, obviously. But I started to realize that through my own journey that I had to find grace for myself. I couldn't get it from anyone outside giving me grace. I needed to realize when I had it in my life and start to give myself some grace. And so I'll share with you my story in a little more detail. In 1985, when I was in college, a freshman in college, I was very naive. And I had found myself pregnant. And I had been raped by my boyfriend. And I'll tell you that back then, date rape was not anything that anyone really recognized at the time. I was just fast and I got myself in a situation. And being naive, I didn't really know what to do. I certainly didn't have the support of the young man who got me pregnant. And so I came home and I was encouraged to have an abortion. And I did. I was young, as I said, I was naive. I didn't know my own choices at the time. I didn't trust who I was at the time and that I could make a different choice. And so I had an abortion and I talk about it because we don't. I talk about my abortion pretty openly because we don't. And many of us have had them and we felt bad about it. We've put ourselves down about it. And that's where I started to realize there was something I needed. There was a hole in my heart. And we also don't talk about child loss, talk about abortion as child loss. But if anyone has had an abortion, you know that there's something that is left when you've had that abortion. something, a hole remained in my heart, and I didn't know what to do to fill it. And so for time, I thought I could fill it with this desire to be a mother, just this trying to become a mother. And I didn't realize what I had available to me. And so I continued on. I continued with my career. And about 17 years after that first loss, I got 2001 happened, 9/11 happened, and I was in a relationship with my boyfriend, and I decided we were going to get married. And so I went off my birth control and got pregnant. And this time I was older. I was a little more wise, I thought. And I believed that this was the time that I was going to be able to make up for the mistake of my childhood, my young adulthood. And try as I might, I wasn't able to carry my child to term. And I went to preterm labor 20 weeks and I lost him. And I was certain that the reason I lost him was because of the abortion 17 years earlier. I was certain that this was punishment for me for making that decision, because when I went to church, I heard that I was a sinner and I was a murderer. And so God obviously had to handle me. And this is how it happened. I started to feel like here I am, a woman, and I can't even do what a woman does. I can't have a child. So for years, I kept trying. I was doing crazy things that I won't even go into detail, but I was doing crazy things to try to get pregnant. And eventually I started to realize that there was love available to me. There was grace available to me. And I found it by going to scripture. I started to find other women who had stories like mine that I had never heard, that no one had ever told me. I found Eve, who lost her child. I found Job's wife, who lost 10 children. And I started to realize that maybe there's something else going on here. Maybe there's something else that will help me. And I just found myself there. And I decided that maybe I needed to share the story and share that grace is available. And so when I talk about grace, what am I talking about? And I have to go back to our meditation this morning a little bit, because grace is, I believe grace is with and has been with me my entire life. I believe that grace was with me even when I had the abortion. And that may be shocking to some of us who've grown up in the church and who have been told, as I was, that that's not grace. But the fact that I still had my sanity, the fact that I still was able to love, that I was still able to reach out and care for other people, I know that grace was with me. And I realized that when I was going through all of those situations, that I was being prepared for this moment right now, this moment where I could talk about it openly and share and write. And so in my book, there are categories of grace that I talk about, that I put them in this way because I don't think we think about them this way. And I talk about grace in grieving, grace in loss, that there is, even in the midst of the worst situations in my life, I had a calm around me, a peace around me, a love around me that I wasn't necessarily tapping into. There's grace in brokenness, and that's not to make brokenness something that we strive for, but to realize that often out of our brokenness, out of my losses, out of not becoming a mother. At 40 years old, I was told that I would not be a mother. Unfortunately, I would not be a mother. It was almost assumed by my doctor. And I just kind of sat there like, really? I thought we were trying to make sure that I would become a mother. And and eventually I became okay with it, because I learned that through my own journey, I became a mother in other ways. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But there's also grace in silence. Sometimes we don't have the words to say what we're feeling and what's going through our minds, what has happened. There's parts of my story that I was never able to tell anyone, because I just couldn't get it out in a way that anyone else would understand. And then once I started writing about it, I started meeting other people like Deanna, who I could get on the phone with and talk for hours when we hadn't even met each other in person yet, and just talk through this, because there's something very similar. Our stories aren't the same, but our hearts are the same. That grace that kept us is the same. that grace that said to us that you can go on even when you have the very least strength within you. And so there are times when I've been silent because I had to, because I didn't know exactly what to say, and I was just left with my own feelings. I had grace and bitterness, and that's something that we don't talk about at all. So when you want to be a mother and you can't, or you're going through your times of infertility and you're struggling through, we are bitter. We become bitter. We become angry. We become upset. We start to wonder. I started to wonder, why am I being punished for this? Plenty of women have abortions. Why am I being punished? How come I can't have a child? And and through the bitterness and allowing myself to get it out, I even found a woman in the Bible who was bitter. And I didn't know that. I wasn't taught that in the way that I needed it for my own health, for my own healing. And so when I saw her story, I started to realize that bitterness is a phase. I didn't make it my lifestyle, but it was a portion of my life that I'm glad I went through, because grace was there with me. Grace was there taking me through, saying, go ahead, get that out. Feel what you're feeling, because to deny your emotions is only going to limit your ability to heal. And so I felt the grace in my bitterness. I also felt the grace in grief. Once I was able to get through all of what I had gone through, I was able to grieve. And I want to stop there for a second, because grief is a hard place to be in. As I mentioned, I've lost 2 children. And so grieving that, seeing other people get pregnant quickly and easily and just have their babies, made me mad. And it also made me grieve even more the children that I had lost. And there were times when I've isolated myself and made myself sit alone and not go out, because I thought that my grief was visible. I thought that my losses were visible. I thought that when people saw me, they saw what I saw when I looked at myself: the grief, the loss, the infertility, the inability to have children, the desire to be a mother and never, ever being able to see it fulfilled in my life. And so when I went out, I felt like I was on parade almost, because everybody could just see what had happened. And so I isolated with my grief. And I'm talking about that now because we have to stay home. We have to quarantine to some extent. And if you are single, it is extremely hard, because you start to think about those feelings start to come up again. You start to think about what you can't do, and that turns into what you can't have and what you haven't been able to do. And we become hard on ourselves. And I want to encourage you to have grace for yourself, to love yourself, feel your feelings, but give yourself time and space to be okay. Give yourself time and space to understand that this is not forever, and that this will not last forever. You will get through it. I moved on to starting to understand and accept what had happened in my life, and thus grace in accepting what has happened, and understanding that, as our speaker earlier said, there is some place I'm going. This has been a journey for me, and I realized I was on a journey. And then I started to pray, and I started to be more specific in my prayers, and start to think more about what it is I'm praying for. I'm always praying for other people. People always ask me, can you pray for my mother? Can you pray for this and that? And I started to realize that maybe my prayers are effective for myself. And maybe I could have some grace for myself and pray for myself. And then praying through, finding grace and mercy and giving mercy to other people. Having mercy on others helped me to learn how to have mercy for myself. How to say to Kim that you are not a failure. You're not, there's no need to continue to be ashamed of what has happened. You're not unusual in the way that you're the only person who's ever had these situations, and therefore you can't be of any effect in life, which is what I felt. And I share those because I don't know if you felt the same way, but we have a lot of feelings that start to go through our minds when we have these challenges. And I thought that to be a woman, I had to be a mother. I had to have a child. And so not having children really affected my me psychologically and really started to affect how I felt about myself. And then after I lost my second child, my mother died. And when my mother died is when I started to understand grace. I started to understand the grace that had been in my life that I didn't appreciate. And I want to read an excerpt of my book because I think this says it better than I do. Even though I wrote this, I think this says it a little bit better than I can articulate. And so Mother's Day has always been hard for me. You see all these, people come up and say things to you. I've had people say to me, oh, I'm going to say Happy Mother's Day to you anyway, even though you're not a mother. Thank you for reminding me on Mother's Day that I'm not a mother, right? I've had people say to me, well, you have people in your life that you're like a mother, so I'm going to say Happy Mother's Day to you. I would just prefer either you don't say it or just say it. But we don't have to go through all of the extra. But that's what people are uncomfortable with, my not being a mother. And I had to even have grace for them. So I started to, one day on Mother's Day, I decided to start sharing more of my story. And someone said to me, you don't look like what you've been through. Well, I said, praise God for that, because I don't want to walk around looking like everything that I've been through, because grace has been with me. I have been blessed with grace in my life, and I believe you have too. So let me just read a little bit of this. And I say, I cannot find the words to explain how I knew that the scripture is, his grace is sufficient for you. God's strength is made perfect in weakness. And that's 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. And I said, I cannot find the words to explain how I knew the scripture was for me at that time in my life, but it seems there was no other word that mattered. The words came off the page of that old Bible and gripped and massaged and soothed my wounded, aching, dysfunctional heart in his hand. It said in my ears, my mouth, blood, fingers, toes, and tears that God's love, joy, and favor were right there with me to give me the strength I needed to keep going. I didn't need to give up. I just needed to give it all over to him, to no longer hold on to anger, jealousy, and confusion that had been my three best friends since Daniel, my second child, died, and had turned up their influence on me when my mom died. I could stop meeting them at the bedside most nights. I could stop carrying them on my back throughout the day. I could stop listening to them for guidance and direction. I could instead drop them off on the nearest curb, because God's grace had reintroduced herself to me and showed me what a true friend does. She'd always been there, but she was now taking a lead in my life because I was finally willing to let her. Grace was a gentle woman. She waited on me. She had always been around in every situation, standing out of the way while close enough to step forward at the first sign of me stepping backwards. She was not presumptuous, but proper and decent. She was like Anna, the old prophetess who waited at the temple for years just to see the Messiah. She didn't step in to the spotlight until Jesus was born, and she, coming in that instant, gave thanks likewise unto the Lord and spake of him to all them that look for redemption in Jerusalem. This is how grace was in my life. And she had not stopped being that way for me. She waited for years for the right time to instantaneously make herself known to me. She was there when I was raped and scared. She was there when I was 18 and learned I was pregnant. She was there when my sunshine's light was dimmed. She was there in the waiting room at the doctor's office as I observed pregnant woman after pregnant woman walk by with their 38-week full bellies, while I knew in my heart something was wrong with my pregnancy and my Daniel. She held my tongue when the doctor lacked compassion, and I was sure the treatment I received was substandard. Grace spoke for me when I sat next to Timothy at the gravesite over a month after my Daniel died. She selected silence for me when I could only think of exactly the wrong words to say. Though it was too many weeks too late to just now bury him, Grace kept me in that chair during the service, hushed through, though demure. She was there when I returned to work, guiding my words when coworkers asked how I was doing. She was there when I returned to church, standing in the sanctuary for me as I lifted my hands, clapping and shouting in triumph. I had always felt grace in my life, but one day I understood who she was and why she was there. She held my hand when it shook with the uncertainty of whether I could make it or not. She breathed for me. She smiled for me. She held me up. She sat at the end of the bed after my mother left and returned home. Years later, when my mom died, Grace laid in the bed beside me and held me close. Grace kept my mind on God and not on depression. She was that miraculous guardian who drove me home from the doctor's office when I learned I would never, ever be a mother. Over time, Grace has uncovered joy, peace, and the beauty of life. Throughout my life, with all its hurts, pains, and disappointments, Grace has shown me the blessings in my losses. Because I had no strength to undo or redo any of it, Grace has changed the lens through which I view my life. She's shown me how God had been there all the time in her work, but I never noticed the two of them before. She showed me how he caught me over and over again, but I had wiggled my way back to negative thinking and a warped accounting of events. Grace has shown me a better way of seeing, a better way of doing, a better way of being. You see, the way of grace is to let Grace have her way. I just want to say before we end today that grace is available to you. Grace is right there with you. And as some of us have probably heard that grace is God's riches at God's riches at Christ's expense. You may even heard that grace is unmerited favor. And I'm not going to tell you that those two things aren't true, but I want to encourage you to believe that grace is your grandmother who has probably been through some stuff and is there for you to talk to and to learn some things about your own womanhood. Grace are those real ones in your life who will tell you like it is. I had friends during my time when I wanted to kill myself because I was so depressed that they were mothers and I wasn't. And they were like, why are you going to do that? How are you going to do it? And when you fail, I'm going to tell you how stupid that was. You know, they were just real with me to bring me back to reality and spoke to me the way I needed to be spoken to. Grace is also those aunties in your life. You know, those women who may not really be your mother's sister or your father's sister, but they're like an auntie, somebody who you can lean on them, but they will also set you straight and let you know that you can get through this. There's a strength in you and their love surrounds you. Grace are your cousins. Those cousins who you grew up together and you probably fought all the time, but now that you're women and at this age in life, you have some camaraderie together and you can talk to each other. And grace is every woman that you're looking at right now. Every one of us on this call, on this live, on this Zoom meeting, every one of us who's been through something and yet we're still standing. We still have the ability to stand up and come together and listen to one another and share and find strength in each other. That's grace. Grace is a woman, I believe, because she knows how to comfort you, how to hold you when you can't hold yourself, and to help you understand that you are special and what you've been through, what you're going through, doesn't make you weird, doesn't make you a failure, doesn't make you someone who should be ashamed, but a wonderful person who this is going to pass. Who for this is going to make you stronger and is helping you to your way to healing. That's what grace has been in my life. And I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to talk about what I've been through and the opportunity to share that grace is still taking me on a journey. And I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kim. That was beautiful, very, very powerful. I appreciate your transparency and your willingness to share. As you mentioned, like when we first connected, like we just continued to talk for hours.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, like even though our stories are different, we were still connected. We realized our hearts were similar. The impact that God had in our lives was very similar. And that grace, for sometimes it also looks like comfort, comfort that sometimes I felt like I didn't deserve, like just having faith that God would heal, that God would repair, and losing that, but yet and still, I always mention that He sent my sister-in-law as a child for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a very dark place, and she did not have a mother. Well, she let me not say she didn't have a mother. Her mother died when she was 3. So I always describe our relationship as the motherless child and the childless mother, because I always say, we are mothers at the heart. Like, whether you birth a child out of your womb or not, like, we
Yes.
are born mothers at our heart, at our core. Having a child in your womb is not what makes you a mother.
Yes.
And she showed me that. God showed me that grace, that comfort. And it doesn't always look the way we think it does, and it looks different ways. And for me in that moment, like, that was life-changing for me. So I'm so grateful for God's grace, the way he shows up in our lives in different ways. So I know that message was powerful. And I know for some people, this conversation is a touchy one. I know a lot of people had their camera off, and I understand. Of course, I love, as I mentioned before, I love to see everyone's face. But if you can't, that's fine. I understand. I was even getting emotional over here because it brings up a lot for people, and for some people it could be triggers, but it's a conversation that I think needs to be had. And I am thankful for everybody's courage, because as you know, we are also streaming this, and I think our courage can also be reflected in people that may be watching on Facebook that maybe didn't even have the courage to register, because that takes courage to even see this, what we're doing this week, and say, I want to be a part of that. I want to learn something. I want to take something from it. So I do want to open up the chat if there's any questions, or if someone wants to say something verbally, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute your mic, or Egypt might have to unmute your mic. But please, if you have any questions, you may drop it now in the chat or raise your hand. And I'm also looking on Facebook as well, if there's anybody that has questions there for Kim. Okay.
Deanna, may I share a story?
Sure.
So my second pregnancy, I was pregnant at the same time as my best friend. And we clearly didn't plan that, but we got pregnant at the same time. And she was a few months ahead of me. And so she had her child, and we were always planning that our 2 children were going to be best friends, and they were going to grow up and be as close as we were. So she had her child, and 13 days after she had her child, I lost mine. And so for the first 6 months of my goddaughter's life, I couldn't see her. I could not hold a baby, because the last baby I'd held was my child at the hospital watching him die. And so for the next few years, it was just always hard for me to connect with my goddaughter. She wanted to call me godmom, and then she wanted to call me mom, and I wanted her to call me aunt. And I didn't get the significance of her calling me godmom and having mom in what she called me. And so I wrote the book, and my best friend allowed my goddaughter to read it. And she called me and said, I never knew all of this happened, and I wish we had Daniel, but could you now be my mom? And she was 16 at the time. She's 18 now. And I realized grace was even living in my goddaughter, that she would want me after 16 years of me kind of being in and out of her life, because it was just hard for me to see her grow. She still wanted me to be in her life, and she still calls me mom. She'll text me every now and then and say, hey, mom, I am grateful for even this young person who still wants me to be in her life. And as I watch her now, she would have obviously had a graduation this year, but because of coronavirus, she's not having a graduation. But as we share and talk about her going to college, I am reminded that my child would be going to college right now and all of that, but I am able to still live it in a way because of her life. And so I share that to say that there are some hard stories that we have, but really grace and love, comfort, peace, and just that hug that we all need right now it can be found in allowing people to still touch us and love us and be in our lives in the way that they can. And you may find that that is exactly where you're supposed to be right now. And so I just wanted to share that story because it's so important in my life, that I don't have my child, but I have my godchild, and she calls me mom. And I've really never thought that I would hear that for me because my children did not make it.
Am I able to ask a question?
Absolutely.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. This has been wonderful. My question was triggered by your story. So one of the things that I have found is I have lived a very different life than the majority of my friends. And so I think sometimes when it comes to this topic, to your point earlier, people, our community, Black folks, love my folks, we don't want to talk about it. And so we just avoid it. And it turns out being avoiding the person. And I know I have struggled to kind of bridge the gap or help my friends along while like I'm the one experiencing something and healing from it, but it's almost like you have to be a conduit or a guide for your friends because they're so uncomfortable with it. So either they completely exclude you, which I've had friends and family do that, or you're constantly having to play the role of telling them what's okay versus what's not okay. Can you speak to that? Is it just eventually over time? And I've had this for years, by the way. It'll stop being the case, or how have you navigated that? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And yes, I've had that. As I talked a little bit about Mother's Day and what people say to you on Mother's Day, but I've also had it just every day, going out, going to events and people are bringing their children, or I just don't want to go because I can't do this baby shower or gender reveal. I just can't do it. And yes, I've had that pressure to explain why I can't. Or you'll even have people say, I really want to understand better, but you got to help me. It's not my responsibility to help you. And I had to learn to not take it as my responsibility. I also had to learn to not take it personally and keep it when people say things that are upsetting or when they exclude me from things. I learned to accept that I'm going to be excluded from some things. And in some ways, I was grateful that I wasn't put in a position to have to be certain places. And so what I learned over time was to express how I felt when I could, and when I couldn't, I didn't put pressure on myself to do it. And so if someone came to me and said, look, it's Mother's Day, I don't really know what to say to you, I would tell them, you just said it. That's fine. We don't have to go into any more detail. Or if they ask me, I remember Daniel, how should we recognize him? I would tell somebody, let me do that. You don't have to. Because it was too hard for me to have to go through every year on what would have been his birthday, how I was feeling, and all of that. If I share it, then you can say something. If not, then let's just leave it. That's best for me. And I think you also can tell the heart of people. The ones who are really sincerely trying to reach out to you because they love you and they want to be in that space with you, versus the ones who are just trying to drudge up things for you. And so I also went to therapy. Let me just be completely transparent. I also went to therapy because after losing my father, my 2 children, and my mother, I was on the brink of just losing everything. And so therapy helped me to become more comfortable with some of the things that we learned in meditation today, being comfortable in my own space. And when I say, another thing women, we don't say is no. We don't say, no, I'm not doing that. No, it's not, I'm not comfortable with that. And risking that someone else is going to say, well, then I'm just not going to deal with you anymore. That's okay. If they can't respect you and your feelings, then that may be okay. Because you will find people in your life who are able to handle and to help is the right word, help you and be positive to you and encouraging in your life. So that's how I've navigated. I hope I answered your question, or at least let you know that it's not uncommon. I've been there because we don't talk about it and people are not comfortable with it.
You did answer the question, and I think it reminds me of a point that my mother said. She said, when people walk out of your life, those are no longer your people. And that's okay. And she meant that, like, it was like, period. And, you know, I think sometimes because we attach shame or guilt or all of the non-positive emotions to this reality, we make it our fault that they walked out versus that season just might have passed, right? So that was helpful. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Also, just to add to that, if you do not understand, even inviting them to things like this. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we're streaming this, because, and why it's empowerment, not just to those of us that are in it, but those that are around us that are affected. If they're our loved ones, then they should feel affected and they should want to advocate along with you. If they are truly your friends, if they are truly your loved ones. Like, I know, like my mom and my sister, it took them a long time to really understand what I was going through. Because for the longest, I didn't explain it. I would just like, if they started to come to me about a child, like soon after I got married, or people were saying it before I could even end the marriage day, like the wedding day. And I would just like dead it, and I would have an attitude about it. And they didn't fully understand until I sat them down. And so some of it is on us just explaining it. I feel like sometimes our loved ones at least deserve that, to just listen. This is the situation. This is how I feel about it. And to this day, my mom is always so thankful that I shared it, because she never looked at it that way. I would, so many people will walk up to anybody and say, well, when you having kids? Or when you having another one? Or what's taking you so long? You forget to realize that you don't know if I just was in a really depressed state this morning. You don't know if I've lost a child. You don't know if I'm struggling to have a child. You don't know if I just don't want children. I have friends that just don't want children, and that's okay. I think for some people, they project what they want in your life on you, So I will find myself saying, if that's what you want, you pray for that. Or, in my head, I had a whole lot more other things that I wanted to say. But like Kim says, sometimes you have to offer grace and see beyond what people are saying. Sometimes they mean well. They just don't know what to say. They don't know what to say. And they see your life a certain way, and they want to project it. And, sometimes people just need to live their life, live their own life. They can't.
I agree. And I think sometimes it's generational too, because women have evolved. And so sometimes the choice to have children or not have children is connected to the perception of, well, if you weren't so focused on your career, and if you started earlier, and if you did this and you did that, then of course you would have had children. Whereas the other narrative, to your point, Deanna, am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm.
To your point, it could have been, I didn't want children, or maybe that's just not what God had for me, or like there's a whole slew of possibilities. And in our culture, Lord knows I've heard so many times, but you have those childbearing hips. It's like, it's not a direct correlation. And people really mean well, especially I think elders, they mean well.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely, I encourage everybody that's on the line. If I always say, if it's not you, it's someone that's affected by infertility, invite a friend, invite a loved one, because I think bringing them into the conversation allows them to fully understand. The more people that have a voice with this, because I know, like I always say, I speak for people that don't have a voice in this yet. Like, I understand. It took me a long time to get to the point that I could be open and share this part of my story. And it did not end when I had my child. It did not start, I should say, when I had my child. It started before that. So I just want to encourage everybody to search for that healing, search for that voice, continue to advocate for yourself, continue to show up for things like this. and be a part of the conversation, because your courage is affecting someone else that's on this call right now. It's affecting someone that's watching on Facebook. And I just encourage you to just keep on going, keep on fighting, and find that inner peace. Just like Kim, I also went through counseling. In fact, I'm still in counseling. It's an ongoing thing for me. I'm on an ongoing journey of healing. Yes. We are products of our past, and not just in this, but my childhood, relationships, like, someone also mentioned a book, as another plug before we get off of the call, that there's a book that we mentioned yesterday, and I'll put it in a thing. It was pretty much called, has something to do with the fact that we, especially us as Black women, we hold trauma in our bodies, in our womb. And sometimes that's also directly related to our infertility. So doing the work and addressing that, and that goes way back, ancestors, slavery, like we hold a lot, and we have to deal with it. So I'm a proud advocate of therapy. I'm transparent about it. Relationship therapy, marriage, we are products of the things that we've gone through, and the way we handle things, the things that trigger us, are related to the things in the trauma that we've dealt with, that we haven't dealt with. So I encourage everybody. I will also put that, when I send out a thank you for all those that came on today, I will make sure to put in there those couple of books, The Sunshine and Grace, Sunshine and Grace. I put the wrong title in here. Sunshine and Daniel, Seeking Grace and Lost Motherhood. Awesome book. And I'll also put some suggestions for therapy as well. Is there You're welcome. You're welcome. If there's anything else that you guys need me to drop in that thank you that was mentioned on here, you can mention it in the chat before you log off. And I'll make sure that you also have our handles, our social media handles and emails, in case you want to get in contact to have the conversation further. But I thank you all. I thank you, Kim, for sharing. Yes, I'll also include the meditation resources. I will definitely put Ayesha's information in there. She's wonderful. She's a dear friend of mine as well. So once again, have a great morning. I hope this was a good start as you continue your journey to healing. Have a great day.